your job is to help us understand, particularly businesses, understand better using science, because that's what we need to base all of this on. So, Dimitri and Marcial, hand over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you to be there. Thank you because you are choosing this conference. You are not at the other one. And it means that this morning you succeed to get out of your bed, meaning you succeed stopping pushing on what we call the snooze button that you have all on your smartphone. You succeed to get out of your bed, and I just want to ask you something. Who this morning was pressing on the snooze button of your smartphone? Okay. Who did it yesterday? I think today it's because change now, maybe you don't use it. Okay. Who used it since the beginning of the year? Okay. More or less everybody are using the snooze button. I think we can find two reasons for that. The first one, it's because the snooze button is much bigger than the one to switch off the alarm on your smartphone. And maybe a second one, I think it's a personal feedback, it's because every morning, not me, but my wife is using the snooze button of the family smartphone. So 6:30, 6:45, 7, 7:15, 7:30, and then I try to go to outside of the bed, and then I go to work. So every morning we have that. And there is something which is true, is that the alarm clock on environmental issue has been ringing for the last 20 years. We sometimes even hear there that society will need to pay the price for what they have done on the earth. In France, we have even invented the word collapsology. I mean, it means that we will all collapse. Maybe we won't be there tomorrow. Maybe the planets won't be there tomorrow. We have even invented the word collapsology. There is something true on the fact that we are pushing on this snooze button. Society, governments, politics, company, you, me, we are still pushing on the snooze button on environmental actions or issues. The question we need to ask is, why do we keep doing this? We cannot say that we don't want to act. Nobody will say that here. It's not true. We cannot say that we don't think there is an issue on the environment. It's not true. So that could lead to another question. Why do we keep pushing on this button? And why and how can we stop pushing on this button? Is it because we have an important meeting? Is it because we have a deadline? Is it because we have a date with somebody? I can tell you something. If it's not tangible, if it's not concrete, if we don't have a deadline, then our brains will not consider it urgent. I mean, in your personal life, in your pro-life, all the time your brains will postpone when it's not urgent, when it's not absolutely necessary.
And I think you're absolutely right, Dimitri. That is exactly what we have been doing with environmental challenges. We are just putting our head in the sand. But here is the good news. The science has finally found a way to stop us from snoozing, a way to set that deadline. This is happening with water, biodiversity, and climate change, of course. This is what we call, overall, planetary boundaries, meaning that we now understand that the Earth has a limited capacity to absorb our pressure. So, what does this mean? Imagine that ecosystems are like a balloon. You can blow air in, and the balloon will absorb that, and it will tolerate that pressure. If you keep blowing air into that balloon, then the plastic begins to stretch, and after a while, nothing left there. So, if ecosystems are a balloon, planetary boundaries is the science telling you how much air you can put inside. Let me show you a figure. This figure is very important to me. That's why I wanted to share it with you all. and it represents just that. So imagine that the circle is the balloon. The dotted line that you see on one aspect there is that dotted line. If you're blue, then the balloon is fine. If it's yellow, you're reaching that tipping point where the balloon can pop. And if you're in the red zone, well, that's danger. And what you can see is that by 2015, we had already crossed that boundary for several issues. Adam mentioned biodiversity, and that is very true. You can see that. But also on things like land use and the nitrogen cycle, all these fancy words, those are real issues. What is really, really exciting here is that the science of planetary boundaries keeps making great strides. We now understand better than we have ever how the systems interact with one another. We now understand that fighting climate change also means protecting biodiversity. Why? Any ideas? I'll give you one example. Let's take a forest. If you protect biodiversity in a forest, that forest is more resilient. A forest that is more resilient will store more carbon and for longer periods of time. This is what we need to understand better. And so, overall, I can tell you, we have the science. What you might be wondering now is, okay, sounds great, but it's just a big concept. Is there something concrete that I can use, either personally or for my company? My answer to that is also yes. And I'll give you just one example. Last year, the Lancet journal published a report that showed what a planetary boundaries diet would look like. In this diet, by switching to less animal-based products, and by improving our production systems, we could manage to stay below that threshold. So the science is there. It is becoming more and more operational, meaning that we now know how we need to act.
And there is something which is very important on what Marcial was saying, is that from our perspective, it will completely change the way we think about moving on this environmental issue. Why? It's because now we know that there are some boundaries. I mean, we know that the planet is not an unlimited planet, but we are now starting to understand what are the limits of the planet. So it means that we know what is expected from us. We also understand what is the price to go beyond these boundaries. And that will completely change the way we act on these topics. The question we need to ask, or the leader, or you within the company, need to ask, it's no longer what can I do, but what do I need to do to stay beyond those boundaries. And we have worked with many companies in this topic at Quantis. And I have the best news maybe for this summit. In the last 6 months, the number of companies using this type of approach has been more than doubled. And there are more than 800 companies which are thinking about their climate change strategy to be aligned with the Paris Agreement, to be aligned with the 1.5 degrees maximum rise of temperature. So what does it mean? I mean, what are the real examples of that? Let me give you 2 examples. The first one is L'Oréal. L'Oréal seems to be a big company. I mean, they are producing cosmetics, and Christian will explain you the main or the big challenge of those industries on the environmental issue. But they have in mind that they have to do something, so they decided to work on climate change and to reduce their climate emission by 50% by 2030. I mean, they will slash by 2 their climate emissions, their carbon emission, by 2030. On water, we have Danone or Mars who are working on that. What does it mean to work on water with the framework of the planetary boundaries? It means that on the full value chain, you need to think about what is the fair quantity for me as a company that I can get on the environment, And how do I need to share with the other people who need the water there, for humanity, for other industry? I need to work with the public agencies, I need to work with farmers, I need to work with people who are on the ground to be sure that we have the good amount of water that we are using, and everybody can use that. Mars has committed to be sure that globally, on their full value chain, they will use the good annually renewable quantity of water for the coming years. Let's be honest, this type of change is big, it's massive. We are speaking with our client about changing sometimes completely the business model, about stopping some business, about reviewing completely the assets that they are using.
And Dimitri, I guess that what you're trying to say there is that business as usual and incremental change are not going to cut it. We need to get out of bed, stop that snooze, and just make sure that our businesses are resilient and our society is resilient. And I know that that sounds very scary. The science is scary as well, and we understand you because we also work in sustainability. Don't worry, we also have good news there. And that is what is fantastic, is that we see that that change is possible. We see it every day. We know that we can make the impossible happen. Let me give you one example of that. Let's take, for example, what Burger King did last year. I guess that most of you or all of you know Burger King. What you might not know is that just last year, the king of the Whopper decided to introduce in their menu the Impossible Whopper, a meatless burger, which means that it has a impact that it's probably 90% lower than the regular service they are providing. This is a massive shift to their business. And what is interesting is that they even claim that this change led to the best financial quarter they have had in the last 4 years. That is incredible. That is something that just 5 years ago would have sounded completely crazy, whether you are a consumer or an investor. What this shows you is that the change and the shift is not only needed, but is also expected. I have to be honest as well that in some cases, that change might not be as visible, but it is equally important. The companies we support at Quantis, a lot of them have completely changed the way they operate. And as Dimitri mentioned, imagine what this means for a big corporation. Imagine that every single one of the hundreds of packaging designers needs to make sure that their solutions are aligned with planetary boundaries. Imagine that every person working in supply chain, for example, needs to prove that their distribution network has been perfected. And even crazier it might sound, imagine that every high-ranking manager now has targets and bonuses that are based on their environmental performance. What is important there is not that change as it is, but the thrill that these people are getting now from working for sustainability. They are not only working to make money for the company, they are working because they have found meaning in what they're doing. And let's make this point very clear. Planetary boundaries will be the key driver for business transformation in the 21st century. And this role is only going to grow stronger. Probably a lot of you heard about the letter that Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, sent at the beginning of the month to CEOs all around the world. What you might not have understood, and that it's a little bit between the lines, is that what he's actually trying to accomplish is to have a portfolio that, should I remind you, is worth $7 trillion, is aligned with planetary boundaries. And he's doing that by putting pressure on these companies to make sure that their climate strategy is aligned with the Paris Agreement. That's just the beginning. And this proves something. The fact that planetary boundaries is changing its status and it's becoming a license to operate for companies.
And if you try to follow our speech, you notice maybe that we never use the word sustainability. For us, it's not like it's a shitty word, but it means that this is now the issue now. I mean, we have the concept, we know what we have to do. Some companies are already using this type of concept. What is needed now is the business transformation. I mean, we don't care about being sure that your companies, the way you are working, are adapted, the report, the communication are adapted to a new framework, like we did for SDGs, for example. No, I have the framework of planetary boundaries. This is not the issue. The issue is that we have everything to be ready for business transformation. We need to change our habits. We need to change the business model. We need to change the way we operate as society, as companies. And last word, I have only one dream to share with all of you. Tomorrow morning, you, me, my wife, you, Marcial, you will stop pushing the snooze button. You will wake up, you will get up, you will go to work. The change is here, and the change is now. Thank you.